Alrighty, let's get cutting. So, I measured the original skirt, and it has panels of silk that are 28 inches wide, and the total circumference is 168 inches. So my silk is not 28 inches across in width. It is 43. Well, actually, it's 44, but when I count seam allowance, it's 43. So what I have figured out, and I've done some math, is if I cut 4 skirt widths, I will get a finished width of 174 inches, which is only 4 inches bigger than the original skirt, which I think is acceptable in this case. Because I do want to use the selvages, because she used the selvages, and I think a 4-inch difference probably isn't going to make that much of a difference in the grand scheme of things, but I still get to use the selvage. Because I definitely want to use the selvage edges, because I wouldn't have to then spend time overcasting edges to keep it from raveling, and also because that's what she did. So I think that's a good marriage of close enough to her original width of her skirt, but also using the technique she did, which was using her selvage. So for my skirt length, because we're cutting this to fit me, not her, I'm going to need to cut my skirts just under 50 inches. I usually try for 47. And I'm going to cut 4 lengths of that. Let's go ahead and rip a waistband on this. So her waistband is just under, well, it's 1 3/8 inches wide. And if I wanted, I'm going to cut mine 2 inches and use just under a 1/2 inch seam allowance on either side. And to make this super easy, and because I should have plenty of fabric, I'm just going to cut a whole length across, and I'll worry about cutting it to size later. Waistband. I'm going to pull over the original bodice because I do want to show everyone. So I do want to show y'all something. So here it is. So here she has a 1-piece back. She doesn't even try to tuck it to make it look like a 3-piece, and she's gathering the back here quite a bit actually, which my bodice back does not do. So we're going to need to add some width at the bottom, but not at the top. Yeah, so the lining's done the exact same way, so it's just treated as a 1-piece. I feel like this part wasn't as gathered, so I'm just going to kind of lightly put those across. Because if you measure the original, the waistband is from the back piece measures 14 inches. But the fabric with the gathery bits measures about 19, so I need about 5 inches of excess. To make my life easy, I'm going to set this on the selvage. My other original, the 1860s one, did that. This one I can't tell because it's all the way folded under. We're going to cut the sleeve next. I don't ever do bishop sleeves, so the only pattern I have isn't one fitted to me. It's Simplicity. I think it's 4551. I measured the original's sleeves very, very carefully because her fabric is kind of, brittle and shredding. And I discovered that the bottom of her sleeves, like around the wrist, is 23 inches wide. And the top part at the shoulder is 24 inches wide. So I took this pattern piece, measured it. Turns out this is only about an inch away from the original at the bottom and exactly what the original is on the top. So I just took a little tuck here, and then we'll just spread the rest of it out and it will work. Let's cut the pelerine. So the pelerine, I did make a pattern out of that, and I posted it last time I posted about this dress, but I will post it again below, or at least a link to the blog post that has this original pattern in it. This is the back. So the back, I kind of laid the pelerine over my shoulders because it's an original, but it's an original that I wasn't having to put any stress. I just laid it over my shoulders to see how it fit. The back fits really well. The front needs about 1.5 inches on either side just added, so it will meet in the front. And maybe on the shoulder seams, I might add 1/2 inch to each one of them to give me a little bit more wiggle room. Here's the original again. And those are her cuffs. I'm going to measure across real quick. I'm also going to need some excess for shirring this little trim here. 7 1/4, which basically is a 1/2 circle. Might be easier to sketch this out. Roughly 7 1/2, so I'm going to give it 8 just to be on the safe side. It is 3.5 inches tall. And because I'm getting lazy, we're just going to guesstimate 1/4 inch seam allowances. So those are the fancy cuffs. I also need to cut the cuffs that go underneath that. Oh, here comes the cat, which is never a good idea when we have originals around. Okay, so underneath it is a regular cuff, about 1 inch in width. And we're gonna need binding for the, or we're gonna need piping for the waistband, the arm size, the neckline. Alright, so it is evening, and I know the video quality is not gonna be the best on this because my light changes when I don't have natural light. But I did want to share what I want to do this evening, and then we'll pick it up tomorrow with actual filming stuff. So I am sewing together these skirt panels. I already put in the pocket. The pocket I probably should mention because I did make a pattern of this pocket, and I posted it with the last video of this dress along with the pelerine pattern, but I'll link it below as well. That way if you want an actual 1850s pattern pocket pattern, you have one, you can go get that one. It's free, it's there. And I did make mine a little bit longer because I do like larger pockets. She had her pocket on the left side of her dress, and usually I have my pockets on the right, but since we're copying this original, I decided to go ahead and go with it. Who knows, maybe I'll like the pockets on the left side of the dress. Guess we're going to find out. I'm thinking what I'm going to do for the facing is just lay it flat with the hem and stitch it up top. The original facing is not pinked, but it's finished in a way. Okay, let me just show you. Here's the part that's fallen out. Essentially, it's not really pinks because they're too big to be pinking shears, but they're like little rectangular or scallopy things to finish the edge. But I also know it's perfectly correct to just leave a raw edge, which is probably what I'm going to do because I ripped it, so it's not going to really unravel anymore. And because the original hem is bound in hem tape, I bought some wool hem tape. I bought it in cream, and then I'm just going to dye it red, or attempt to dye it red. Let's say that. I also have a length in black that I could use, but I'm thinking red will look better and blend in slightly. So I'm hoping the red dye is going to dye it. It should, because I've dyed silk with this, and wool is just another protein fiber, so in theory it should work just fine. Alright, let's talk about attaching the hem braid. So, this is what it looks like, and I folded it over, just like the original did, and there's what it looks like on the front side and the back side. Now the original attached this in whip stitches. I know you can also do running stitches. So what she did is she took from the right side, and in a color that is comparable to the fashion fabric, so red, and in this case she did black, of course. She did little whip stitches all the way across, and on the underside she did that again, but she did it in like a gray or a white thread. That doesn't necessarily match. I might just go ahead and keep with the red in case I go back through both layers. Basically, it's just been super easy. I've just been unfolding it, tucking the fabric underneath, folding it back over, and putting a pin through it. And if you're using wool hem braiding or dyeing it, fair warning, it does shrink quite a bit. I measured about 9 inches past what I needed, and my hem tape is now 2 inches shorter than it needs to be. So I am currently dyeing 4 more inches of hem tape over on the stove. If you're not aware why we use facing and hem braid, facing is really to protect the edge of the skirt. You know, dust, your boots kicking up against it is gonna wear on your fabric, and this is just a piece of throwaway fabric that you can attach kind of loosely, haphazardly, if you will, and then whenever it gets really gross and nasty and worn, you can just take it off and attach a new one. It also is nice because you only need a 1/2 inch of fashion fabric, whereas if you did a traditional turned hem, you would need a lot more fabric, and that way it saves on your nice stuff. Hem tape is something I don't usually do. My understanding is that not all originals use it, but it's frequently seen. Essentially, it's just to protect the edge. So I do notice on some of my silk dresses, especially the ones I like and I wear a lot, this hem will get really ratted out, but this will actually protect the edge longer. While I'm waiting for the extra hem tape to dry, I think I'm going to go ahead and start stitching a bodice together. It looks so short, but we did take off space because we're going to add a waistband on this gown. Alright, now I get to stitch that up. Alright, there's the bodice, and this is how I turned it over. So she turned hers over differently than I usually do mine. So for where the eyes go, she folded over the lining, and then she folded this all the way over it, and she did a tiny little running stitch right up here, which is what I'm going to do. And she kind of did the same thing here. Folded it over, left a little bit of a hangover, and did a tiny little running stitch. So that'll be on my list of things to do to handwork. I have my piping here. We might as well go ahead and put in some piping here. I usually do the first part of piping by hand with basting stitches, and then I will go in once I turn in the sleeves, and that's when I machine sew my piping. So for this, it's just I don't like the bulk of so much machine stitching over on top of everything. So like this is machine stitched, and then the sleeves are machine stitched, and if I machine stitch the piping on too, I feel like it just gets very bulky in there. This I'm going to machine stitch very quickly, and then fold it over instead of hand stitch it. Alrighty, so piping is ready to go on. I think I'm going to go ahead and prep doing the basting stitches for the waistline. So how she did it is hers stopped 3 inches from the side seam, and on this side started 3 inches from the side seam. Also, her gathering portion finished is about 3 inches as well, but that will definitely vary depending on the size of the bodice and such. She has roughly 3 3/4 on either side. That's laid flat, and this is gathered up. So, you know, depending on how much fabric I added is how much I need to gather that in. So I'm going to go do all of that handwork, which is just, again, stitching up these sides, stitching that piping down, stitching this piping down, and then putting gathering thread here. Alright, next up with this bodice, I'm going to go ahead and put in the hooks and eyes before we start gathering the waist. Her hooks and eyes are very far apart, about 1.5 inches. The top one is like right at the top, and the next one is about 1 inch down, and then the rest of them are about 1.5 inches apart, which is kind of far. I'm a little concerned about how it's going to stay closed and not gape open, so I'm hoping it'll be okay. If for my body shape I need to put more in, I can just put one in between. Pull the original back over. She did it with 2 strands of thread, so maybe doubled over, maybe not. It feels like silk thread. It's very, very soft, which I don't have. We're going to use cotton. And she just left the thread in between, so she just kind of jumped from hook to eye, or from hook to hook to hook. And she did the same thing with the eyes, and the eyes kind of barely peep out. So that's what I'm going to do with mine. While we're putting on the hooks and eyes, I thought it might be a good idea to go ahead and put on the cuffs for the sleeves. It's a lot of fabric to be gathered into a little space. I'm going to stitch that by machine, then we'll come back and finish it. Before we do the hooks and eyes, let's go ahead and put the sleeves that we've prepped into here. And looking at the original, her bottom seam here pretty much lines up with her side seam. Just a little bit off. Alright, I can get that sewn in, and I have a little bit of handwork to do. It is time to go ahead and put in the gauging threads. So let's take a look at the original. It her gauging thread and her gauging stitches start about 1/4 of an inch from the top, and there's a second one about 1/4 inch underneath that. So we're going to do 2 gauging threads, about 1/4 inch down and then another 1/4 inch below that, and that will be our gauging threads. Alright, so the sleeves are basically done, except for, of course, putting on the cuffs and closures. We can go ahead and put on the waistband, I think. I'm going to stitch that on, and then we can work on adding the piping. We are ready to work on the cuffs. So what I did is took a really good look at the original cuffs and figured out how I think they would have been put together. So what I can come up with is that there's a patch fabric and there's a lining piece. They aren't stitched together how like we would normally do it. There's clearly a whip stitch where she just laid them, you know, wrong sides together. And there's clearly like a whip stitch that she whipped them together. So like, I don't know, my choice would have been to turn it right sides together, stitch it, and turn it inside out. But that's not what she did, and we're doing what she did. So, and it doesn't matter if they're seen from the outside because we're going to cover that with trim anyway. And that's what it should look like at the end. That's what hers looks like. And then once that's done, we can go ahead and talk about the trimming for the cuffs. And while I am whipping the cuffs together, I'm also going to work on the trim work, which is just a little bit of shirring. So the original shows about an inch wide piece of fabric, and I can clearly feel that it's not meeting in the center. It's about maybe 3/8 of an inch here. The fold over is about 3/8 of an inch here and 3/8 of an inch here. There's a gap in the middle. You can clearly feel it's not as thick as the rest of it. So that's kind of what I tried to replicate. And the stitching is just shy of 1/4 of an inch on each side. So I'm just going to do a really tiny running stitch about 1/4 of an inch on either side of each piece. And that's what we're going to shirr up. I wasn't quite sure how long to make the shirring. Obviously it had to be, you know, more than the, you know, length of this half moon shape here. But I'm obviously not going to cut apart the original to find out how long her piece of shirring was. So I think this is about 13 inches, the length of this half moon, and I think I did the cut, this is like 20 or 21. So there'll be enough to shirr, but it's not like super fully gathered. So I kind of stuck with 1.5 to 1 3/4 of the length of it. So we'll see how that looks. If I need to, I can cut a little bit more and add it on, or I can cut some off. So it won't be that big of a deal, but we're going to see if this method works first. Alright, so I went ahead and made one up. It looks really good. So that's basically exactly what I wanted it to look like. And so I'll show you kind of how I did this one. I just put the trim on it, and then kind of mark the middle on either side. And then I just took these little gathering threads here and just pulled them. And kind of spread them out a little bit. Then I just took these threads that were hanging off and I just stitched them back across. So we can go ahead and attach them. So on hers, it looks like what she did is, because this is still open, and she folded this in and attached it on this side of the cuff, and then folded this in and attached it on the other side, and then just did a running stitch all the way through it. And this will just fold back just like that. So we have our little cuff. And then she also took the end of this cuff, the very center, and just tacked it in with like 4 stitches right at the top. That way it didn't flip over on her. Last step for the bodice, we're going to put some hooks and eyes right at the waistband. So the original has it to where instead of putting them here to continue them, they're putting them, she put them at the very edge, I guess, to keep it from flipping over. I'm not really sure what the reasoning is, but that's what we're going to do. And now the eyes are set right across the edge here, but you can clearly see where they were right around here on the original, and I think it's just somebody was a little bit wider in the waist than, say, the last lady who remade this dress, and she moved them. The latest person moved them. last step on the bodice is that I'm going to put hooks and eyes on the cuffs as well. And then we're going to attach the skirt. I marked like the quarters, like here's 1/4 of the bodice and here's 1/4 of the bodice. So because the skirt's in 4 pieces, in theory, that will make this fit. Some people really like gauging because it's like not precise and you don't have to do like math. I personally prefer pleating because now I get to take each and every single pleat that we're making and hand whip it into a waistband, and I'm just not a fan. Alright, we are in the very last step of the dress, aside from accessories, of course. Since this does not have a off-center closure, it has a center front closure. What she did to kind of hide the seam down the center front was take a little bit of the skirt fabric, fold it over on that seam, and she tacked it down several times. So we're just going to do that very quickly. At some point, somebody added a facing of black silk taffeta to this side of the skirt, but it appears to be a later addition because the silk is in much better condition. It's not quite as ratty as the rest of the silk, and it's definitely a different silk. It's a full taffeta, not a tissue taffeta. It's shinier and it's darker than the other black. So it was a later addition. I don't know when though. I don't know if it was like fairly recently. Silk isn't in greatest condition, so it's not like super new, like someone just tried to fix it. It's been like that for a while, but I don't think it's not an original because I think she would have used fashion fabric. So essentially when the skirt closes over, you see this. So there really shouldn't be any gaps showing. That's how she did it. Alright. So that is that. There's all the tiny little pleats all individually whipped in. Alright, so here's the actual dress part of it. Actually, it's not completely done because we still don't have a collar cups yet, but while I was waiting for the lace for the day bodice of the lilac chantilly dress to come in, I was working on this dress. So the lace finally came in, so I'm getting dressed up to kind of show y'all that finished project, and I figure, you know what, I just finished putting the wash pocket into the skirt, because I had sewn the entire gauging and then realized I forgot the wash pocket. So yeah, that happens. So I had to take out just like a little section and then like redo it. So yeah, so this is what it looks like. So I figured I was already in my corset and hoop skirt, so even though the pelerine's not done and the dress isn't completely done, let's go ahead and get dressed and kind of like see what it looks like. So here it is. Get up a little bit so you can actually see the waist a little bit. If I can maybe move back. Oh, if I move back, that works. So yeah. Maybe a little too much gathering. Maybe the gathering should be more concentrated up here. But I'm overall happy with the fit. You can definitely see my corset line. I think that's because I'm using such a very thin silk. With the pelerine, it definitely won't be noticeable, but maybe if I wore the dress without the pelerine, I might choose to wear a corset cover over it to kind of smooth out these lines a little bit more. But other than that, it fits really well. I think we can go ahead and keep working on the pelerine and get this project kind of wrapped up. Alrighty, so the trim came in, and this is what I have. It needs to be ironed, but it's very, very soft, so I can tell it is silk fringe, but I might do a burn test just to make sure. But it's very fine and thin. It very much resembles the original, at least in terms of feel, and it looks really nice against the red, I think. I think it'll work really nicely. So, I think for the pelerine, our very first step will be to sew up this back on the silk, since we cut it in 2 pieces, as the original did. And I think I added 1/2 inch seam allowances. It's been like a week or 2 since I cut this with y'all. So, that's what we're going to do. 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way down. Probably iron it flat, because that's what I feel is going on in her pelerine. It's hard to tell, and I'm definitely not taking apart an original to really deeply study it. So, yeah, we're going to do by feel. And there's our pelerine back complete. So what we're going to do now is sew the front and the back together. So I'm going to do that what I call bag lining, which is what you would probably know as modern day lining, like how you would normally line something, where all the seams are in the inside, you don't see any raw edges. Now I'm going to stitch all this together, and we'll come back and stitch the whole thing together. Now we're going to put them right sides together, and we're not going to stitch up the neckline. We're going to leave that raw, but we're going to stitch all the way around the rest of it. It is now all stitched together. I also clipped all the edges, that way when we flip it inside out, the seams lay nicely. So we're going to go ahead and take it at the neckline and pull it all the way through. And making sure that the edges are all pushed out. There aren't really edges in this pelerine, it's mostly just curves. And then we're going to iron it. And when we iron it, it doesn't really particularly matter if there's like a little bit of the lining showing through. She did it pretty much on the edge. And sometimes you want to do it a little bit with the fashion fabric going over so you don't see the lining, but because she covered it in fringe, it doesn't look like she particularly cared. So we're just going to do it right on the edge. Just iron it all the way around, and we'll probably put on the fringe before we bind the neckline. Almost done. Trim time. So I ironed it, did a burn test. It's at least mostly silk. It didn't burn like all the way, like the fire kept going out, but it burned completely to ash, and it definitely smelled like burnt silk. So not entirely sure what's mixed in there. It may be like rayon or something, but there isn't a lot of options when it comes to trim, when it comes to silk. When it comes to fringe, finding something that's appropriate is hard, so you really can't be picky. So we look on the back side, you see mostly fringe down here. So it kind of extends the pelerine a little bit. So to attach trim, even though we did do machine work on this dress, this is going to be best attached by hand with a small running stitch. And you can't really see them on her trim side, but you can see them on the lining side. So right on the very edge, she did just a row of stitching. Binding. So I have my binding piece. It is cut on the straight, which is what hers is cut at. It seems unusual to me. I would have wanted it on the bias, but we'll see how well it takes this curve. I stitch that with 1/2 inch seam allowance, come back, and we'll turn it around. Now it's time to stitch the neckline. So what she did is she took her thread and just tiny little whip stitches down this front edge to kind of close up the seam. So I put in one of the cuffs, and I think we can go ahead and put in the other one. So I just made a very simple cuff, just folded over, piece of linen, and then I put a little bit of bias on it, and that's cotton. Yeah, so it just sits in there, and there's Ian's cattail. She found some silk to sit on. It happens to be the project I'm working on, unfortunately, but what can you do? And then just whipped it in. This is not something that needs to be done particularly well. It's meant to be taken out whenever it gets dirty, so functions just like a collar. There we are, both cuffs in. So I also got the pelerine trimmed, so we are basically done except for a collar. I have the dress, and I also have the collar that I made. So it's crochet from an 1854 pattern. It's a little bulkier than I think I would prefer. I use the size 30 thread like the pattern called for, but I'm wondering if their size 30 is different than our size 30. So It's going to work, and it's still very fine. It's not like super bulky, so I think we're going to go ahead and use it. I tried using sewing thread weight for the collar at first. That did not work. It made the collar far too small, and so I decided to try it with the size 30 thread. I modified the pattern a little bit. I didn't do like all the rows. I think there were 2 more rows I ended up not doing because I got really, really tired of it. Yeah, that's not too big of a gap. I think that's acceptable. It's a little bit bigger than I think I would prefer, but it's okay. So here it is. Looks really nice. It looks so much better with all this little pieces to it, like the cuffs and the collar. It just looks complete. Still probably need a corset cover with it. I see some things that need to be smoothed out across here, but that's okay. I'm going to leave it for today. It'll be fine. I suppose I can go ahead and accessorize it. I already added the belt and earrings. Brought one of my original brooches. So put this on. So there's the collar. Looks really good, accessorized in black, I think. I also have my 1850s hair. Actually managed to put the rats in this time. They cooperated today, although this side looks better than this side does, but it's okay. It'll work. Didn't use any pomade, and so that would have helped a lot, but I'm wearing this for like 10 minutes and I'm getting out of it, so it wasn't worth it to put in all the effort into it for that. So let's go ahead and put on the pelerine. And honestly, I think I put the brooch in a little early because I think I'm going to close the pelerine with the brooch. So I'll put that back on in a second. Pelerine. Flip it over. Little capelet. Okay. And it should probably go underneath the collar, I would assume, so that the collar gets seen. I would guess that's the goal. Because why am I wearing a pretty collar if it's not going to be seen? There we go. Just use the brooch. Alright, so there we are with the finished project. I think it's adorable. I think the fringe is just the right amount. I'm glad I chose this color and didn't go with black. I think I have so many dresses that are trimmed in black because black goes with everything and it's really easy to trim things in black. But I'm really glad I went with something different this time, and I think it sets off everything very nicely. I'm going to go ahead and get out the original dress so we can compare them side by side. And it's definitely a different effect considering she's all in black and I'm not, but I mean, basically the designs are very similar and we're almost nearly the exact same size except for I'm a little taller. I am the same height as the original lady who made this dress, but whoever remade it and tucked up the hem was like 6 inches shorter. And so like our hems look nothing alike. I can show you. There are the hems. Hers is vastly shorter, and you can see the petticoat because I don't have any particularly short petticoats, but kind of just showing you the hem that we worked on with the braid. We have the bishop sleeves trimmed with the shirring, so those are very similar. And then of course we have the pelerine that is trimmed in very similar fringe, honestly. This stuff's a little thicker than this is, and of course this is made to kind of match the dress, while this clearly wasn't. So finding red silk fringe was difficult, and then finding in the style I liked that was appropriate for the period and also would match the dress silk wasn't going to happen. So kind of had to deal with, what we had. But here's the back of the dress. Probably at this point all you're seeing is pelerine back there. We can take it off in a second. The one thing I do have a complaint about this particular style, because there is no boning, because usually even if I made a cotton dress, or when I have in the past made a cotton dress, I darted the lining and just gathered the fashion fabric. And so there was still structure here. And this has no structure, and so these hooks and eyes keep weaving themselves out because they're not, super tight against anything. So that's kind of annoying. And of course they're a little bit spaced out. I think I should probably put 1 or 2 more, like right here, here, and here, just to kind of keep this from gaping just a little bit. But that's my shape. She doesn't appear to be as busty as I am. Particularly the lady who remade it. She was wider in the waist, but not at all in the bust, because she never did actually do anything with these busts That's nice. She left them the same. So apparently she just wasn't as shapely as I am. So I think just for me that might help. But other than that, I think it turned out really well. And it's nothing that's too terrible. Like even when they do work themselves out, like this one's already worked itself out again. You know, I just put it back. You can't tell because it doesn't gape open, or at least it hasn't yet. Maybe if I work for a really long time and like 6 of them work their way out, it might start gaping. But as this, so far it has not been a big issue. It's just kind of been a minor annoyance that I might have to consider fixing at a later point in time. But for right now, I think it's good. I'm going to put her back in the corner. I guess we can go ahead and talk about how I would further accessorize this gown if I was going out. So I'm wearing a hoop today. I think this style works for like pre-hoop as well. Looking at fashion plates and original garments and that sort of thing with this pelerine, I think it would work for like a little bit before the hoop. So I do have a separate bonnet for that, but since I'm wearing a hoop today, I pulled out stuff that would work for like 56 or 57. So first I have one of my bonnets. This is a Timely Tresses pattern. I think we've seen this before, maybe on the parasol video. I absolutely love this bonnet. And it actually is trimmed with real Leando peacock feathers. So like my character Nettie, her family's plantation was called Leando, and they raised peacocks. And Leando is still around, and they still have peacocks on property. So I took some feathers from Leando peacocks and put them on my bonnet. So fun little living history tidbit. I only have one like late 50s bonnet and then one early 50s bonnet. So I'm really glad that this dress works with this bonnet, so I didn't have to make another one. So that's that. As far as shawls, this one I'm pretty sure is like actually 1860s, but it's an original piece, and it has very pretty applique on it. So this is probably what I would wear until I get a more appropriate one. I'm working on several shawls from the Workwoman's Guide, and so there'll be at least 2 that'll look really good with this dress. Well, actually the wool on that chair right there is going to be trimmed in Chantilly lace or fur. I think that one's fur. And probably wouldn't wear with this dress because that'd be all red, but I'm working on 2 green ones I think would look good with this dress. So maybe use this until I get those done, and then we can trade over to something that'd be a little bit more appropriate. Parasols, I have a hard time picking parasols for this dress because a lot of the ones I have that are later 1850s are brown, and I never picked up on that before. I really don't like brown with this dress. I would prefer a blue parasol. All my blue ones have their original covers, and I'm not recovering them because they're in pristine condition. So apparently I need to go find a parasol that is either shattered or does not have a cover and recover it in blue, because yeah, I have one blue 1850s parasol, but it's like early 1850s, and with the hoop it would have been obsolete by this point in time. So we're using this one today. I could wear the green one too, but we saw that in the last video with the cotton candy dress, I think. So I didn't want to show that one again, but I probably could use that one. But yeah, I have this one as well. So there I am, all ready to go out. It is a lot of layers, like with the pelerine too. But the pelerine is staying on pretty well. I was worried that it was going to kind of be loosey, but it doesn't seem to be doing that as much, I think because I closed it with the brooch. Probably going to have to wear this dress with a brooch unless I want to pin the pelerine in, which seems like an awful lot of work, and why not just have a bit of jewelry there? Like, I have plenty of jewelry. There's going to be no situation where I'm going to be without jewelry. I have a ton of it. So, yes. I'm going to take the shawl off. It's a bit warm in here. So there we are, another project complete. Very happy with how this one turned out, and I can't wait to see what we do next. So thank you so much for joining me, and I will see you in the next video.